Shalom Haverim, and hello friends. Good to be with you this Sunday morning or whenever you are watching. I heard a story this week about a man who had this real hankering for some barbecue. So he went to his local barbecue restaurant and walked in and he talked to the waiter. He said, "Sir, I would like 6 of your finest barbecue ribs." And the waiter said, I'm sorry, we don't serve ribs in quantities of 6. We only sell them in quantities of 3, 5, 7, and 13. 3, 5, 7, and 13, yeah. It turns out they only sold prime rib. Because 3, 5, 7, and 13 are prime numbers. All right. So we are talking about meat today. And no, this is not a cooking show. We're talking specifically about meat sacrifice to idols. And we're talking about this because this passage that comes up at least twice in the New Testament, where Paul is talking to new believers about how if meat is sacrificed to idols, they must make certain decisions about whether or not to eat that meat. Our passage for today comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And this chapter begins with this well-known passage that calls us to remember that sometimes love will require us to make sacrifices. So let's look at this passage. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 begins with this well-known phrase that knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Now, I think we've all experienced this before. Paul is telling these Corinthians, these new believers, he's saying, you're learning. Well done. Pat on the back. Continue to grow and continue to develop. Continue to learn new things. But don't be a jerk about it. Paul doesn't use that language, but that's my theological language. Don't be a jerk about it, okay? It has this feel of a kid that comes home after his first year in college or after his first semester, and he's studying philosophy or something like that. And all the family comes together at Thanksgiving, and he's starting talking to these family members and all these things, and he's telling them what they're believing wrong and what they're doing wrong and why they need to be doing that and why they need to be doing other things. It's like you've got a couple months of philosophy under your belt, and now all at once you're a genius, all at once you're the expert. Don't let this knowledge puff you up. Instead, let love build up others. So Paul goes on, he says after this famous phrase about knowledge puffing up and love building up, he talks to these Corinthians about idol worship. Idols, like these creatures made out of wood and stone and glass, these objects that are being worshipped by the people of Corinth. So Corinth would have been known for being a polytheistic community. They would have worshipped many gods, many deities represented in these idols. Now Paul says to these well-learned, these new Christians, he says, an idol is nothing at all in the world, and there is no God but one. The people knew this, and Paul was just reassuring them. This is a statement of monotheism. There is only one God. So you know that those idols that people are worshiping are nothing but glass, nothing but stone, nothing but wood. These are creatures made by human hand. He's saying, and since there's nothing but wood or glass or stone in these items, it doesn't matter if these things have been offered to them. And what Paul is drawing attention to is specifically meat that has been sacrificed to these idols. It would have been the common practice to bring animal sacrifices to the temples in Corinth. And those animals would have been slaughtered there, and part of the meat would have been used in these ritualistic sacrifices. And what do you do with the rest of it? Well, a really good way to make some money for the temple system is to take that remaining meat and take it to the local marketplace. And in these marketplaces, people could buy meat meat that was brought straight from the butcher or straight from the farm, or meat that was brought from the temple. So the question was, is it okay to eat this meat that was offered to these idols? And Paul's saying, well, since it's just wood, since it's just stone or glass, these idols are nothing at all. So by all means, eat that meat. If you have a hankering for prime rib and it's on sale in the marketplace, even if it was offered to an idol, that's okay. It's just meat. And those are just stone, just wood, just glass. But one thing. But if that meat sacrificed to an idol causes another brother or sister to stumble, if there is a person who is even younger in their faith, that they don't have the knowledge that you do, if they don't realize that those idols are truly nothing, well, then you should not eat that meat. Yes, you have the freedom to eat that meat that's sacrificed to idols because it's still meat, it's still good. But if it causes somebody else to question their own commitment to Christ, then you should rethink it. Then you should not eat that meat. We have been given freedom in Christ, but there are times that we are called to sacrifice that freedom. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. So there are times when we, as members of a community, must give up freedoms, must give up certain things, sacrifice certain things, not like sacrificing an animal, but sacrifice our freedoms or our rights for the greater good of the community. All right, so that's the biblical background. Are you ready to get really nerdy here? I know we haven't been doing this as much because it's harder to get nerdy on a screen, where if we were in person, we could ask questions. I could show you illustrations on the PowerPoint and all that. We're going to try to get a little bit nerdy here because we're going to be talking about social contract theory. All right, social contract theory. We know this social contract theory goes all the way back to the ancient Greek philosophers, but it was really brought into the forefront, made known well by somebody named Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes wrote this book called Leviathan in the year 1651, where he lays out his social contract theory. Other philosophers and theologians like John Locke would also pick up on this topic and write about it. Well, social contract theory says that we must give up something if we want to live in a community. He goes back, he says, if we were all living on our own, if we were out in the woods, independent individuals, we would have all sorts of these rights, many rights, all sorts of the rights, and privileges and freedoms. You can do what you want to do. If you live by yourself, you can throw your clothes on the floor, you can leave dirty dishes in the sink, you can hunt whatever animals you want on your own property. You can have all sorts of freedoms. But Hobbes and Locke and others will say, when we come together, the social contract that we have, this agreement we have between other people, means that we will give up some of those freedoms in order to exist as a civil society. For instance, if somebody steals from you in a civil society, in a community, you will give up the right to go and steal from them. Instead, you allow the police to take care of things. If you have a judgment to be made between you and another person, an arbitration, rather than making that decision yourself in a civil society, in a community, you would seek a professional's help, a judge, a litigator of some sort. So social contract theory, among many other aspects of it, says that when you are part of a community, you must give up certain freedoms. So we see this many times in our society today. And it just seems to be obvious to me that when you live with other people, when you live around others in community, you must make sacrifices. You must give up some of your rights and freedom. Again, I mentioned we have the right and freedom, if we're living all alone, to throw our dirty laundry wherever we want in the house. We can throw it on the floor. We can leave our whiskers in the sink after we've shaved. We can leave the dirty dishes on the table or in the sink. You have that right if you are living by yourself. You can keep whatever hours you want. You can play your radio as loud as you want. If you are living all by yourself, you have those rights. You have that freedom. But when you start living in community, the social contract that you make with that other person dictates that you must give up some of those freedoms. So if you get married, your spouse and you have a social contract. And part of that social contract might include that you won't leave your clothes lying all over, or your whiskers in the sink, or your dishes on the counter. If you start a family, you might have to give up your right to stay out late at night or play your music as loud as you want, because your decisions now affect other people. And this is just as true in the church, and that's what Paul is saying. Yes, now in Christ, you have the right, you have the freedom to eat that meat that's been sacrificed to an idol. But remember that your freedoms affect others. So I hear people talking about the freedoms and rights that we have, and yes, you have freedom to not wear a mask out in public, and we have freedom to not receive a vaccine. But remember that we are a part of a community. Remember that we are a part of something bigger. And sometimes being a part of something bigger than ourselves means making sacrifices. Not animal sacrifices, but sacrificing your rights, sacrificing your freedoms. Now, sometimes those sacrifices are going to be easier to make than others. I know that I would struggle to sacrifice eating meat just so that others wouldn't stumble. But I hope that I would make that decision for others. And I know that for me, it'd be a lot easier to sacrifice the vegetables. I'm not going to eat any more vegetables because I know it's not good for other people's relationships to Jesus. No, if only it was that easy. But many people have made that sacrifice. Many parents have sacrificed their schedules or their radio playing. Many have sacrificed finances for their children. Many spouses have sacrificed the freedom of living alone and scattering your clothes around the house or not picking up yourself just so they can be in this relationship with another person. Many of us have sacrificed our freedom to go to restaurants or movies or even to church. And I know that not all of these sacrifices have been easy. But what does Paul say? What is our motivating purpose for all of these sacrifices? We do these things out of love. Social contract theory and Paul, the apostle, way before social contract theory, both have said that when you want to be a part of a community, there may be times you must make sacrifices. Paul invites his fellow Christians to make sacrifices, not animal sacrifices, but to sacrifice some of their freedom, and to do so out of love for their brothers and sisters in Christ. All right, friends, I know that it's not easy, but keep in mind that we are called to a community and we are called to make sacrifices for one another. It's a part of loving your brother and your sister, a part of loving your neighbor, and even a part of loving your enemy. So go out and love on one another this week, even if you have to make sacrifices.